And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of amazing food safety, food quality, the best products that are out there. And if nobody else is going to tell you this, Austin, Morrine's house, and I are going to say thank you. We appreciate all that you do. We love you for that. And if you're new, thank you very much for joining us today. This is the Food Safety Chat Live. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, we go live and we talk about a food safety topic that is of interest to you. And really, you're the stars of the show here. We're here to answer your questions and really dive into a subject and hopefully share a little information because, as we all know, food safety, not a point of competition for sure. And if you've been on the chat at all in the past, you're going to recognize at least one of the two faces that are joining us here today. So we have Austin with Sage Media. Austin, how are you doing today?
Doing good, man. Ready to have a good chat.
Absolutely. And so Morrine is joining us as well, but looks like we have some camera issues. And I'm showing on our side, Morrine, that your microphone is muted. There we go. How are you today?
I'm well. I apologize. Something is off with my camera this morning, but hopefully you can hear me clearly.
No, yeah, we hear you great. I'm sure Tim can hear you just fine as well. So everybody let us know if you can hear Morrine or not. But I think everything will be okay. One of the things that I had learned about, live streams and these type of things is the quality of the picture is a nice thing, but it's really the sound, right? If there's an issue with the sound, that's the problem that people have. But you're coming through loud and clear. You sound great, and we're just happy that you're here. So everybody's filing in here. So part of what we love to do here on the chat, guys, and so Tim has already taken the lead on this as Emisi, and hopefully I didn't mispronounce your name there. I'm sure I did. I've already taken the lead. So let us know where in the world you're at. I'm in Loveland, Colorado. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for that. Of course, Austin, you're kind of in the Denver area here as well, right? Oh, I think we have a bit of a delay with Austin here today as well. Can you hear me, Austin?
Hey, sorry. Can you hear me?
Oh, yep, got you now.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, here in Denver. Got my windows open today, enjoying the brisk, somewhat fall-like weather as opposed to the cold winter weather we've had.
Yeah, it's been a really, really mild. It's going to be again today into the mid 50s. I think down in the metro area, they were saying close to 60 degrees. Oh, good. Yeah, I got Yamisi's name correct. Look at that. Awesome. So I had a friend of mine who had a saying that every now and then you luck out. And he would say, even a blind squirrel finds an acorn every now and then. So I guess I did that. And so, Morrine, where are you at today?
Frigid Minneapolis. It's 20 degrees and better than yesterday. I'd say warmer, but that's relative, isn't it? Yeah,
that's true. Well, I mean, hopefully it'll stay a little bit mild. So if you're new to the chat, guys, one of the things that we love to do here at the morning, Elena's with us. Very good. Everybody, please join us for a drink of your favorite beverage. Cheers. Very nice. So one of the things that we do here on the chat now as well, for my pleasure and your torture, is the dad
What do you
joke.
have today, Bryan?
Here we go, the dad joke. At what point does a joke turn into a dad joke? When it becomes apparent. No, nothing. I like that one. That's a good one. Let's see. So let's, guys, we got a ton to go over here. So let's dive into our topic for today. which I think, guys, is a super important topic, and it's one that gets kind of pushed to the side. And I think a big piece of this is nobody really wants to deal with it because people don't like pain. They don't like having to deal with something that's unpleasant. And of course, one of the most unpleasant things that we have to deal with is a recall. And when we do that, everything that we're doing here, everything that Austin does, everything that Morrine's doing, everything that everybody within the food safety world, everything we're doing is around preventing that recall from happening and getting us to a point where it never happens. And that's kind of the hard thing in what we do, is that it's a negative, right? We're trying to always prevent something from happening. Oh, we lost Austin there. Hopefully he'll be back in a second. And everything that we're doing, these chats, our programs, our certifications, everything that we do, all the webinars we attend, is to prevent that worst case scenario from happening. Now, of course, what we do when you do this is you plan for the best and you prepare for the worst. And that's really everything that we're doing. And then one day the worst happens. And get this pulled up here again. There we go. Welcome back, sir. And
Thank you.
there we go. Beautiful. You're looking great. So we were just going over, Austin, your worst case scenario happens. We're all trying to prevent a recall from happening. It happens. You go through all of the incredible pain associated with that. And the gray hair you see here on my head are a direct result of a couple class 1 recalls that I had to manage. And you get through it. And hopefully, right, there's minimal damage. Your brand is hurt, your reputation, but God forbid, people get sick or worse. And that's going to burden you for the rest of your life. But getting out of it and the aftermath of the recall is what we want to kind of talk about here today. And what happens now? And what should you be doing, no matter your role in food safety? What should you be doing in your company to help the company recover from that really, really terrible situation? And people want to move on, don't they, Austin? It's human nature that if you have a bad experience, people just want to forget it and move on, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of different recalls right now. I mean, companies are going through major recalls, and would say how do I put this politely, right? The attempt to clean up the issue that they've had with their recall through milk toast, I would call it, apologies or statements. I hate to kick someone while they're down, but I was frustrated to see some of the stuff, the marketing campaign coming from McDonald's right now around trying to get people back into the stores, but they're not really addressing, I think, what most people are asking, which is what happened and what are you doing to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Right.
But instead it's run discounts and hope that this just kind of like disappears. And there was a great, I don't know who posted this recently, but I saw it on LinkedIn, a graph that showed how long people remember a recall or associate a brand with a health issue, right? So even Jack in the Box 26 years later, people still associate that brand name with unsafe food.
Yeah.
And so these issues don't go away. But finding it, especially when they're not handled properly, or with empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. If you do a poor job of handling this, people are going to punish that company for a really, really a long time if they survive at all. Morrine, any thoughts on your side?
I'd like to approach this from a slightly different perspective, as you and I discussed in our earlier conversation. There's the component that Austin just introduced, I like to introduce it from the end user experience. So as a consumer, and the joy of being in the food industry is you get to be both. You get to be producer and consumer of the food. And so from a consumer's perspective, obviously the question that we are all asking as consumers is we do have a robust food system. And part of our ability as consumers to make decisions about what we purchase when we purchase it is the trust that we have in that food system. And
Yeah.
so I imagine myself as a consumer looking at all of these major cases happening right now. And of course, history speaks for itself. And I ask myself a lot of questions. What can I trust? Which part is real and which part is not? And the aftermath of it is a question of, okay, so they've cleaned up, they've made everything better, but is it really better, or are we just speeding the train past the problem so that we can get back to the business as usual? So that's the lens that I'd like to bring, where we can certainly talk about the business perspective, and I'm bringing in the idea of, from the consumer side, what might they be thinking about and how might that impact not just the brands that are currently in the news, but us as an industry.
Mm-hmm. No, very good points. And I think key in what I pulled out of that is the word trust. And so, as a mom of a young child, if you don't have trust in that product in the marketplace, the best marketing campaign in the world doesn't matter. You're never going to buy that. You're never going to expose your child to a perceived risk. It's never going to happen. So yeah, all the fancy words, all the high flying, oh, here we have a commitment, all the statements that we read really don't mean a whole lot if that trust isn't there. And that's kind of what we want to dive into here today. To Larry's point here, lawsuits can help, but that's just kind of the punitive side of things that people generally forget about, because those things take years to take place for companies to go through that process. And we get the updates because we're close to it with Bill Marler and what's going on from the litigation side. But really, what I found, and this is kind of a peek behind the curtain, once that recall happens, as the recall coordinator in the company, the head of food safety, you really have a unique opportunity. You can really impact change because the company has gone through a very traumatic experience, right? If they survive. And the company's like, oh my God, right? Everybody wakes up. And that messaging that we fought in the past, which is, well, we never had a problem before, happened, right? And all of a sudden, the executives in the company who maybe didn't understand it now, they understand now. And you can get a lot of stuff done in that period of time. And the last thing you want to do is sweep this thing under the rug and go shoo, and then just keep doing the same old. So what we wanted to talk about here today is, how do you recover? And what are some of those steps that you need to take? And what are those things that you need to kind of avoid? And so we'll take this in the framing that I like to use, which is plan, do, check, act, right? The basics in food safety and quality assurance always are there. And we sometimes we get too fancy and we forget these things. So that continuous improvement cycle of how you're managing these things needs to be taken a look at. And you need to look at it from that standpoint. And so to Austin's point, and what Morrine was saying as well, is so step one is you need to commit in public very, very openly and very transparently of what happened and what you're going to do to prevent this from ever happening again. Figure out what happened and why it happened. And when you look back, Austin, at some of the major crises that we've had and who did a good job of responding, there's really only one that comes to the top of the pile, and that was Tylenol. And from some of the younger people that are in our group now, they probably don't even know what happened with Tylenol. So maybe we can give them kind of a quick little summary of Tylenol. Are you familiar with that as well? Or would you like me to go through
it? Yeah. Wait, was that in the early mid 80s?
Yeah, I forget the timing. Yeah, maybe early 90s or things like. If anybody knows timing on that in the comments, please let us know. But that sounds about right.
Yeah. But yeah, like they preemptively came out and said, we're pulling everything, and publicly announced that they're pulling it. They didn't pull it in a secretive, way, where it was like, well, we're going to pull the product and hope nobody gets sick or nobody knows about this. They came out and made a public statement when they did their recall as well.
Right. And the entire reason that all of the products that we have now with all of these seals on everything, including things that you're like, why did you seal this? Right. So like a thing of liquid detergent dish soap, right? It's got a seal on it. You're like, well, why? And all those seals are there because of Tylenol. So I think this started in the Chicago area. There was a crazy person who contaminated with, I think it was cyanide or something really terrible, Tylenol pain capsules, and contaminated these tablets, the little capsules, put them back on the shelves in the stores, snuck back in and put these things in. People took them and people died. And it was an incredible blow for Tylenol, but it's been a case study ever since because their response was exactly what you should do. It was that, to your point, Austin, they were extremely public. They're like, hey, everybody, holy crap, we have a huge problem. A crazy person has taken our product and contaminated it. We're not exactly sure what's going on, but here's the things that we're doing. We pull all the product off the shelves. If you have it at home, don't take it. Right? Extremely transparent in the process. And as a result of that, Tylenol is an extremely strong brand to this day and used as a case study on why you need to be transparent in public. Anything to add to that, Morrine?
Yeah, well, oh, sorry, go ahead, Morrine.
No, I was going to say, from, again, the consumer's perspective, while consumers do expect that food that's in commerce should always be safe, I think that the average person understands that sometimes genuine mistakes will happen. Yeah. And there's nothing more frustrating than somebody taking you for a ride, so to speak. And so when those mistakes do happen and they are genuine mistakes, I think as a consumer, and most people I talk to about food safety generally appreciate the candid feedback that a company would give in the case of a mishap. It's actually worse if something goes wrong and then you treat the consumer as though they really don't see it, like the writing is not on the wall, that something is wrong. And I always have a conversation with my colleagues about how do people find out about recalls if they're not in food safety, right? We have many recalls going on at any given time, and not all of them make the news. And so we have these shadow recall events happening where the consumer is not even aware that a product they have might be on recall. I actually had a colleague here who had the carrots that were recalled. And after that, she got the call, she threw it out. But obviously, she came to my desk and asked, oh, guess what? Now I'm a case study for food safety recall. And we talked about that. Then I sent her the update a few days later when it came out that somebody actually died in association to that product. So for the consumer, it's a nerve-wracking experience when you actually know about it. It's worse when you find out aftermath that you actually had this product and maybe you consumed it and now you find out later. So there is value to being open. I'm not saying that people should put everything on Twitter. That's not my intent. My intent is to say that the more information you can provide the consumer when you are in a crisis so they can make informed decisions, the more likely you are to come out better the other end, because again, it's building on that concept of trust. So being able to balance the legal implications and all the business discussions that need to happen, but also realizing that you're only in business because your consumers trust you. The minute you lose that, doesn't matter how much you put into trying to keep the house in order. If the consumers are not buying what you're selling, you have no house.
Yeah, it's poof. It's gone. And that's a really good point. Yeah, go ahead, Austin. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, no, and I was going to say, and I wonder how the legal team factors that in whenever, because we all have our own, blind spots, right? When you focus on food safety, this is your narrow tunnel of view, and when you focus on law, that is your narrow tunnel. And so I wonder how that comes into play in those conversations within the legal team, because it's easy for me to step back and say, well, the lawyers took control of this and they're trying to protect the brand, and therefore no one's going to admit that anything went wrong here. That's my knee-jerk reaction. But what how are they calculating what should be said versus how much they protect the brand, and seeing that potentially the legal way or the legal perception of how you protect the brand might actually be causing long-term damage to the brand, right? We're trying to protect it right now by not saying anything, but what is that going to actually mean in the long run of 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Because like you said, with Tylenol, they did, they handled it a certain way and then it became a non-issue.
Right.
So I just wonder how, and this is, getting back to the concept of like food safety culture, and I'm big on talking about creating food safety culture coalitions, right? So like a team of people from across different departments, right? Someone from HR, someone from finance, someone from ops, so that you can have those conversations and say, okay, well, what do we, what's a holistic view of how we approach this, as opposed to letting one department kind of run the messaging.
Right. Yeah, really good comments in there. So part of this is, you're 100% right, is the legal team in the company is there to protect the company, right? That's the perspective that they're taking. And unfortunately, sometimes it's very short term. It's like, okay, the legal team is going to be, we need to protect the company now. We need to minimize lawsuits. We need to make sure that there's not evidence against us. Everybody shut up. Don't talk about this. Let us deal with it. I'm here to say, and some people I'm sure are going to disagree with this, that's the wrong approach. And part of how you test this is what we've talked about here on the chat before, is you need to test your systems in advance. To your point, Austin, to find these things out is, okay, we're going to be going through and doing a crisis management scenario, and we're going to pretend that we had a bad recall. We're just not going to do a traceability exercise. We're going to do the whole thing. We are going to pretend that FDA has contacted us and that we've had a recall. Then those behaviors start coming out, right? So if that's the time to test it. So if the legal team responds in that way, you can work on that in advance. And to your point, Austin, put the trainings and the programs in place to say, okay, we need to think about this long term. And hey, guess what? Maybe paying some fines and penalties is justified for what we do in this particular scenario. So tell you what, guys, let's keep this from happening. How's that? And maybe we could put a little more money in the training budget for food safety so that we have that insurance policy so it doesn't happen. So it's very important to be able to root these things out in advance. Yamisi brings up a very good point here. And this is, I was going to bring up this point as well, but she beat me to it, is that Kroger and Costco, right? There are companies out there that have amazing programs. To Morrine's point, I have carrots from Costco that I bought in my fridge. Have I thrown them out? No, because Costco hasn't contacted me, because I know that they have really robust programs in place. And if those carrots from that manufacturer were involved in this recall, I would know, because they would send me an email. And I trust that from them. Back to your point, Morrine, is that trust element. Really good comments here, guys. Keep them coming. So Elena here says, I think of all the recalls and missed opportunities, our industry would have benefited with proper root cause. Yep, absolutely. And so Austin's having a little technical difficulty here as well. So the plan step in the beginning, extremely important that you get that commitment to that transparency so that you can work through that anguish and fear that happens during the recall, and then the natural tendency afterwards to move on. You can't do that. Does that make sense, Morrine?
Does. And there's a question in the chat that we can discuss while we wait for Austin to come back. Cotman put in a question about what happens when a customer adulterates their own food. And then this happens quite a bit in restaurants where people will put things in their food and then complain about it, right? The cockroaches and whatever. So what are your thoughts on that?
That's a good point. And there's Austin. Welcome back, sir. So the question that Cortland put on the table, Austin, is how can a company protect itself from a consumer who adulterates their own food? Yeah, those things happen, right? People are looking to scam the system. And in the past, there used to be a database where known scammers, there was a company that would keep a database of people who would try and scam food companies. Hey, I bought your cream cheese and I found a big rock in it or whatever. Oops, poor Austin, he's having trouble today. And we could go back to that database and see if this was a person who would go from company to company trying to scam companies. A court case struck that down, and they said you can't keep that database. So food companies no longer have the ability to track those type of things. But I think, and I'll get your comments on this as well, Morrine, is really it kind of comes down to having those robust programs in place. And if it's something that doesn't make sense, you can defend against it. So, for example, if you have a filler for, let's say, like a beverage or something, Cortland, and you know that right at that filler nozzle head for those containers, that you have mesh screens in place, and there's no way anything can get through that system above a certain size. And you know that your containers are completely blown out and sterilized before filling. You have that information in your back pocket. And you can talk with the consumers and educate them. If they continue down that path, you have a defense. And if they're not being rational, they're up to something in 99% of the cases I've seen. Morrine, does that make sense to you?
It does. And again, it's a good question, especially my experience with this has mostly been on the restaurant side where people put things in their food so that they avoid paying for the food and they make a whole fracas about it. So it's not unusual for it to happen. It certainly can happen. I'd say that to your point, Bryan, in the beginning, if you're experiencing it for the first time, it might be a shocker and you deal with it like you do all other complaints. But like, this is why GFSI systems, and I'm sure FSMA is big on this as well, is having a robust consumer complaint system where you collect the data and there needs to be a CAPA process. So once you receive the data, what do you do with it? What do you have a team that understands the types of concerns historically that have been associated with your product? And so if it's something that you know to happen, so let's say that you have a failure in your system that you know about where you have, too many seeds, or you have fruit pits ending up in the product, and it's something that's normal, then you start off with that. But if they're complaining about something that has no association with your product, that's a red flag. So having that system of addressing customer complaints, but then arming yourself with data from your system, that's why GFSI insists on say what you're going to do what you say and be able to prove it. If it does get to a point where you have to go to litigation, the customer will have to bring their data and you'll have to bring yours. So most of the time, customers will not want to go to court if they know that it's a fraudulent claim. But if they do decide to bring you to that situation, then it's battle of the titans, so to speak. It's lawyers against lawyers, and it's all about data and what you can support based on historical complaints from other customers.
Yep, and nobody wins in that situation. So a final comment on that is, innocent until proven guilty. Always assume that the consumer is being honest and wants to convey this information to you. So, for example, and sometimes if you walk the consumer through this, it's helpful. So it's very good then to have your consumer affairs group, whoever's the first line talking with the consumer, to understand this. That if something's escalation, you can escalate. I can think of issues in the past where I've had like a beverage type products that have a seal, as we were talking about earlier. And the consumer would contact us and say, hey, I found this foreign object in your product. And let's say it's like a pebble or something I know that there was no way that could have gotten in the product. I've worked through issues with the consumer in the past where we've come to realize that, well, okay, you have a small child in the house and that product's been open for a few days. Odds are the child put that little pebble into that, and then when the light bulb goes off with the mom, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Then they realize, it's not, and actually those situations go a long way to building your relationship with your consumer, which is super important. And so the next point in the plan, do, check, act, right? Of course, then is step 2, which is do. And you need to put together a team to fix it. And the first step is, what information did FDA provide to you? Did they give you a 483? Did you get a warning letter? What specifically did FDA write you up for in these instances, and make sure that those things are absolutely addressed. And in every district office, when you have a recall, there's a recall coordinator with FDA who's assigned to your case for that recall. You need to work with that person. They are going to be leaving your case open until they're satisfied that you have the corrective actions in place, that it doesn't happen again. So you need to be giving updates. And I've seen issues and heard of issues with recalls where they stay open for more than a year, where FDA is working with the plant to make sure that these things are closed. So you need to put together a team. To Austin's point earlier, it needs to be a multidisciplinary team at the plants and at corporate. You need to involve the corporate sources with this as well. And as I said before, you really need to hit, what's that saying? You need to strike while the iron's hot. You have the attention of the company relative to food safety. If there are things that you've been wanting to do in the past that haven't been fixed to your liking, this is the time to do it. You can really, really move the needle in your company. So do not waste this opportunity if it comes up. You don't want it to come up, but if you're stuck with this situation, you can then use it as the opportunity then to put these programs in place. So remember, in this situation, just like in the first example, the lawyers are not in charge of this situation. So as the recall coordinator in the company, you need to make sure that, as these scenarios that you've gone with, the CEO understands that you need to be directing these processes if you're in that role in the company. And the lawyers are there to help advise, but they are not there to run the process. Really important. And if you don't have outside food safety counsel, number one, you need to make sure that you've got good food safety lawyers on the outside that you can work with to help you with these corrective actions, to make sure that they're done in the right way and that everything is being done in a transparent manner. And as Austin was talking about, food safety culture, right? Why did these things happen? Start doing the root cause analysis and really getting to what happened, why did it happen, what can we do to prevent these things from happening in the future? So putting together that team, really, really important. So Morrine, any other thoughts on that for step 2?
I think as we started out, we mentioned that when negative things happen, typically our response is try to get past them. And to Eleanor's earlier comment about the opportunities that we usually miss when we have mishaps, not to the specific company, but industry as a whole. I think the do part is the heavy lifting for the company, but in the process of the root cause analyses, they do learn a lot. And sometimes we do get to see the 483s. And so you're not directly involved in the recall. It's not your company. It's not even your product category. But you do have the opportunity to share the lessons that you've learned with industry. And to me, I think that is the part that I'm yearning after. As somebody who's young in my career, who hasn't necessarily lived through 10 major recalls, I don't want to learn this through my personal experience. So having the aftermath documented in some sort of executive summary beyond the legal jargon, where what can I train industry based on my experience as somebody who's been and lived through a recall? What value comes out of all the mayhem besides the company surviving? I feel like that's the piece that is missing for our industry, is that output of all the lessons learned in a manner that offers room for improvement for others, so that collectively as an industry, we are moving forward and we are not continuing to have loopholes where others have walked and learned. So if you walk a path and you find that there's a hole there, it is beneficial to let others know that, hey, there's a hole here, you might want to avoid it, or we might want to fill it up, either through training or redefining what best practices are. So yes, the do is critical, and it does build food safety culture if you do it properly as a company. But there is an opportunity to add value to the industry beyond just your doorsteps. And for me, that is something that I'm really looking out for, is what are those 483s telling us and what can I learn from them so that I can improve in my own specific area, but also in just mentorship and collaborating with colleagues in the industry.
Yeah, and I'll speak for Austin here because I know he would say this if he was on camera with us, is that that's something that's really missing in the food industry that we don't have. So we've done the analogy with aircraft. You know, when we have a disaster with an airplane that crashes or something, the National Transportation Safety Board will do an investigation and then they publish the results of what happened. So Kobe Bryant's helicopter tragically crashed and he lost his life along with his young daughter, which was terrible. And afterwards, then a huge investigation took place and a report came out on why that happened. And it was, pilot error. He shouldn't have been flying in that bad weather. And people can learn from that then and say, oh gosh, okay, well, what can we do to keep these things from happening in the future? We don't have that in the food industry. We need more transparency when a large recall happens as to, oh my God, what happened? And what can I do in my company to prevent these things from happening in the future? Because then that's the way that things get better, is that transparency. And unfortunately, we're lacking that in some ways. So the next step then, Morrine, on this is gap assessments. So going through and looking at your different systems. And when I see something that says, oh, we're going to retrain, right? And so I'm channeling Austin here again. Well, if the training didn't work in the first place, what in the world makes you think that the training is going to work now? Perfect. Good timing, Austin. So we're
third device. We'll see how this one works.
There we go. Train, and retrain, right? So a recall happens and the company comes out and says, we're going to retrain everybody, blah, 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 right? And
with the same training that they originally used.
Right.
It didn't work.
Yeah. So we're talking about the gap assessment. So when you see that, it's, if anything, for me, it's like, cop out, right? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think and once again, I have my training blinders on. So, I'm looking at the training and asking myself, well, first of all, if you did the training in the past, why did we have this issue? So before we just kind of have this knee-jerk reaction and say, okay, we'll roll out the training because obviously people didn't learn the first time. Figuring out, is training even what is needed? There's a great flow chart that a woman named Kathy Moore, who's kind of a learning design guru, and she created this chart called Will Training Help? And it's really part of the needs analysis and the root cause analysis prior to doing training, because training is often just kind of implemented so quickly. And so looking at, well, why did this happen? So, what behaviors happened or didn't happen that resulted in this particular recall? And the way it's broken out is what you're looking for is, was it a knowledge issue, right? Which is what most people assume. They assume that people didn't have the right information at the right time or whatever. But that it also could be a skill issue, right? So you can have knowledge, but not have the skill to implement, right? I can read all day about how to play the guitar, but it's not until I pick up the guitar and actually start playing it consistently that I have the skill, right? I can talk to you about the theory, but we need people with skill. So skill is the other one. One that comes up really frequently, especially in the food industry, is environment. So maybe it's not a skill issue, maybe it's not a knowledge issue, but it's an environment issue, right? If we find out, that there's a norovirus, issue because people weren't washing their hands properly, a lot of times the assumption will be, well, we're going to reteach them how to wash their hands. And it's like, no, you're in a 50,000 square foot facility with 3 hand washing stations. That's, they know how to wash their hands. They can't get to it easily enough, right? Or it's too long of a walk. And then there's the fourth thing, which is motivation, right? And is it a motivational or like a cultural factor at play? Because this is another one that we see, right? If you're told to do something safely and to do it within this procedure, but you're not allotted the amount of time or resources necessary, then you're going to do what the culture tells you to do, not what the compliance standard tells you to do. So looking at those, really getting to the root cause of why this happened, before just saying like put people in a classroom and start to roll out training again, because if it didn't work the first time, more than likely it's not going to work the second time, if you don't make those changes.
Yeah, well, and part of it too, right? Put yourself in their shoes. Is if I'm in the plant and I'm on the floor and we've gone through this horrible recall, FDA has been crawling all over my plant, everybody's tense, everybody's upset. I don't even know if I have a job anymore. And now you throw me in classrooms and start preaching to me and all this type of stuff. My impression is going to be, why are you punishing me?
Right.
Are you trying to tell me that I'm the bad guy in this scenario?
Yeah. And that's a lot of times how the employees will interpret it. And that gets into a whole other field of research that I have a huge fascination with, which is motivation theory and understanding, how people are motivated within the classroom. And, a lot of the research that I have around that topic comes from anti-harassment training, and how to create anti-harassment training, because a lot of times people come into an anti-harassment training feeling like they're being accused of something, right? They're like, I'm automatically assumed to be the bad guy, and you're going to teach me how to be a better human being. And, so there's all this baggage that comes before you even start the training, right? So those are elements that have to come into play as well, is thinking about the headspace that your employees or your learners are in, and making sure that it's scoped in a way that doesn't create that resistance to learning.
Right. And yeah, if they get the slightest whiff that you're telling them that they suck, the walls are going to go up. What do you think, Morrine?
I think I immediately go back into I'm trying to remember my training on quality management systems and the different gurus that basically ushered in the era that we have now, Six Sigma and all of these management systems. And the general analogy that most of the issues we have are management issues, not people issues. Sometimes it's really difficult to break that down into a way that's tangible, that allows us to make change. But to Austin's point, training is the weakest of solutions and all the options that we have, unless that is the real problem. And if it is, then you do need to get to some kind of assessment to come to the conclusion that indeed training is the missing piece. And it's not just about training as in 3 PowerPoint slides and go back and change the world. It's about having effective training in the version that the end user actually welcomes and understands and can relate to and can comprehend at their level of education and understanding. So as somebody who actually is trained to be a trainer, university institutions are terrible for not being good at training, because we have the traditional classroom setting. And as the systems of education evolve towards competency-based training, you can see that everything is starting to change towards more learner-based and learner-driven training experience versus the traditional expert standing in front and lecturing people for 2 hours. So yes, sometimes training is the answer. And even when it is, it needs to be done appropriately. But oftentimes it's not. It's 3 or 4 or 5 different things that are broken in 5 different places, and together they create the wave that then becomes a recall problem. I find it hard to believe that there would be one mistake at one point that leads to a recall, just because food safety systems are designed to be robust by nature. We have hurdles. We have 3, 4, 5 checks for certain things. By the time you get to a metal detector, you've gone 3, 4 different other checks, right? So your metal detector is the final checkpoint. And it's usually when a series of systems fail that you end up with a critical failure. So the whole point, and Elena was trying to make this before, is when we think about improving the system, the leadership is often left out of the discussion and equation of what needs to become better for the whole system to function properly. A lot of the change and the need for training and the need for competency is often driven to the frontline workers, most of whom don't really have the power to make decisions about a lot of things. So decisions are made for them, and their job is to execute what the policy says should be done, but they're rarely involved in creating the policy. And so if we want things to change at the end, the tip of the pyramid, so to speak, we have to go backwards and figure out what created the situation that we are in now. And often it is much more upstream than we think. So if we're going to be training about food safety culture, yes, the frontline workers need their share of the pie, but it cannot be that. That cannot be the answer to, we had a recall, let's do retraining food safety culture for the frontline workers. That to me is just, it's a very lazy response, I would say.
No, that's a really, really good way to put it. And like Elena said here, maybe the real training is needed at the leadership level, 100%. And so really, I think this gets back to, for the second point around this gap assessment around doing, is the listening piece of it. And we know from, corrective action in general, if you're jumping to a conclusion as to what the problem is, odds are you're going to be wrong. Right? So sitting back, and so part of the lesson with this is if you have gone through this recall and you're now trying to put in corrective actions to prevent this from happening again, you can't go back to your day job and go, shoo, right? You need to focus in on this and listen. What are the people telling you? And you're going to be surprised by what they have to say. And
what I think is really interesting is that I have people contact me, because I'm known for this, food safety culture training. And they're like, well, we want to do food safety culture training for our frontline. And it's like, if we don't start with management and leadership and the back office, it's pointless to do food safety culture training for your frontline team, because ultimately they are implementing the culture that is being dripped down to them from that leadership position and from those departments that make the decisions that ultimately will affect food safety. So yeah, it's I agree that everything starts with the leadership aspect, because the frontline don't really have the say in designing the process or procedure around any of this stuff.
Right. And part of this as well is that there's a phrase called the dog's not barking, right? So if you have a dog in your house that's constantly barking at things and making noise, and all of a sudden the dog is quiet, why? Right? Something has changed. And a lot of times you have to look for those things that aren't there. And that's hard. Right? So it's easy to go out and tackle something that is insufficient. Oh, my environmental monitoring program is terrible. I need to fix that. What are the dogs not barking? What are the things that are missing in your company that should be there? And you're only going to find that out, to Austin's point and Maureen's point as well, is you're only going to find that out by talking with people and investigating. To Austin's point earlier with the hand wash stations, right? If the hand wash station's on the other side of the plant and the change room is on the other side and the people have to walk 100 yards to go wash their hands, they're not going to do it. And the only way you're going to find that out is by talking with people. There's things missing. You had a recall. There's things that are missing. What's missing? And often that's more important.
Definitely. And that's why whenever, I do like consulting around trying to figure, because I'll talk to companies and they're like, well, we want to work on food safety culture. And it's like, well, that's a really broad topic. So what does that mean, first of all? But then going in and not only talking to leadership and finding out what it means to them and what KPIs they want to affect, but then, like you said, going out and talking to the front line and doing that more like qualitative research to find out what are those existing beliefs and values within the frontline team, because that's where the rubber really meets the road. Is that's where you get the really good information of like, oh, okay, these were things that we didn't think about before.
Yeah.
And I love that process of trying to like identify those themes,
Yeah. And to your point, Austin, you may need to bring in, and we talked about this on the chat before, that fresh set of eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Because odds are, if this has happened and you didn't see it coming, you're too close to it. So having outside sources who come in and can do this, right? Look around and ask objective questions, because sometimes people are scared, right? I don't want to say anything because I'll probably get fired. I saw somebody else who said something and they got fired. So
Right.
I'm not going to say anything. You need people on the outside who can come in and identify those things and make people face hard truth in those areas. Would you agree, Morrine?
I do. And to your earlier point, rich sources of information for what's not there and what might be there, but not in the right form, right? Because sometimes you have things there, but they're not in the right form. So training methodology might be one of those examples where you're training based on what you learned or how you were trained, and it might not be the right method of training for the audience that you're trying to impact and create change for. 483s to me are a rich source of information. I know people typically don't like to read them, but they're kind of a cheat sheet into FDA's mind and what they're looking for when they go into spaces. So I often look out for them just to see what are they saying, how are they critiquing the environments in which they're going. And oftentimes when you read through them, you go back and you say, oh snap, we don't have that either. Or maybe I need to rethink how this is structured in my space, because if this is how they went and evaluated these guys and they were given a warning, if they came to my space, they'd probably feel the same way, or I'd be pretty close to, skin of my teeth kind of experience. So recalls, like I said, are terrible and they're frustrating. And most of the times we just want to get past them. But for those of us on the other side of the equation who are not directly related, so we're not going through any crisis. Most of us right now are not. We are watching everything unfold for the companies that are on the chopping board, so to speak. But our opportunity is that right now there's a tension in this and a lot of information is coming out. It's a good time to be paying attention and taking good notes and reading what is coming through, save the documents that are being posted on the Food Safety Magazine and the recall websites. A lot of data is coming through, which is right there for the taking. Save that information so that when you're doing your next risk assessment, you have quality data from which to gather information. And all of this can also be used to create a summary, one page for leadership, where you can tell them, hey, look, this is what's currently happening. SQF and GFSI requires us to provide monthly updates. This is a good opportunity to have a one-pager summary of, hey, look, this company is going through this. These are the things that were flagged. When I compare their system to our system, this is where I see similar gaps. Perhaps it's time for us to do something rather than wait until we're the ones in trouble.
Yep, absolutely.
That is an awesome idea. I love that, to be able to to take the 483s that are out there and utilize those as for talking points, to go back to leadership and saying, we have these same, risks within our facility and we've identified that we're not properly addressing them. So, here's what we can do to make sure that we don't become the next company with this same 483. I think that's awesome.
Yep. And I wonder if there's any groups that publishes warning letters and, oh, hey, wait, I've got my locals group. I put it in there. And so here is the link again to that. And again, guys, this is free. And so go out there and every week I go through and I read those every single week. And if there's information in there that people need, I will communicate that. You're 100% right. And again, I think I talked this about a few weeks ago. This is the whole reason why I started doing this, is to get this information out there. So we're ahead of the curve on these type of things. So
something I just thought about, and I would love to float this out to the group think. I wonder if, so let's say, for instance, Taylor Farms was, the issue with the onions or whatever for McDonald's or any of these recall situations where if a facility has a recall, but they were GFSI certified. What seems like an interesting opportunity, because we've talked about an NTSB type of agency for food, right? But we don't have anything like that where there's an agency that comes in and does a root cause analysis and, figures out the reason for the recall. So I wonder if the certifying bodies, if you want to become SQF certified again, or hey, of course he wants to bark right now. If you want to become recertified, that you have to provide a root cause analysis for your recall, right? If you want to hold on. Hey, come here.
So now my dog hears your dog barking.
So yeah, like would that be a realistic ask to say like, hey, if you want to get your SQF or your BRC or your 22,000 or whatever it is, you have to provide a root cause analysis that shows why this happened. Because I keep trying to think of like, what is a way that we can enforce the industry to provide an actual root cause analysis and that we can utilize for further learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're getting a little low on time here. So putting together that information and putting together a written gap assessment of closing these things out, including plants and corporate and your barking dogs. And so then go back and then close out those gaps and do this and put together formalized meetings, meet with your leadership teams. And to your point, Austin, is there any reason you shouldn't publicize this? Right? The lawyers are going to say, oh, absolutely not. Right? But you should, right? To Morrine's point, you need to reestablish trust. How do you do that? Right? You can't hide it. The lawyers are going to fight it, but you need to have that information out there. And then go back and realize that this isn't something that you're going to stop doing. This should now become part of your operating, right? This needs to become part of your food safety culture of how do we maintain these things so that this never, ever, ever happens again. Mm-hmm. And so there's a question here I definitely wanted to get into everybody here to think about is, okay, everything that we've been talking about here today, why the hell would you wait for the recall to happen? Right? You should be doing this ahead of time. Act like you've had a recall, do your scenarios, go through your trainings, go through it within your company, and then use that to put the systems in place. Again, right back to our objective at the beginning of our chat here today. Our objective is to keep this from ever happening. We have just laid out the roadmap of how you prevent this from happening. So why wait for it to happen? What do you think of that, guys?
That's a question I ask myself daily that I still struggle and I'm still looking for an answer for, which is, cost benefit analysis. This is what a recall costs if we're looking at it strictly from a financial standpoint and not even the human factor. I'm continually baffled at why this isn't discussed more often or planned for. I don't know. I don't have a good response because it really does not make any sense to me why more companies aren't pre-planning and thinking through what recall prevention looks like and what the cost of that recall is going to be. I don't know, Morrine?
I'm right there with you, Austin. As, of course, somebody who is in industry, it's an uphill battle trying to walk through what you just said, the cost-benefit analysis. But again, I'd like to close where I started, coming from the consumer perspective. I think that consumers they have a sense of loyalty to brands, and so are very forgiving, even when there's a mishap. They're more likely to return to a brand if they feel that the brand has restored honor, so to speak, well enough. And so I think companies are willing to take risk in that sense, that even if there is a recall and they're able to clean it up and come out better the other end, that the consumer might waver to other brands shortly while they clean house, but then return home, so to speak, because of that loyalty. But given what we've seen in history and how we started with consumers also don't forget, I go back to those that are actually impacted seriously, because not all recalls lead to issues for all of us, right? Different people are impacted at different levels. Some people just get to throw away the product and get their money back. And some people get to have lifelong health issues. And some people don't make it through recalls that have, sickness situations. So as somebody who is extremely passionate about not just public health, but people in general, I love people and I love when people are happy. I think it's a mistake to take the consumer for granted at any given point. It does not matter the business decisions that need to be made. The minute you start taking the consumer for granted, where your decisions are solely based on finances and protecting the walls, because I think the business is the customer. Protecting the walls and what's under the walls does not make any sense to me as a food safety professional. So I think it really is going to push us, kind of like the airline industry. They had to come to a point where they realized that being honest and working with NTSB when there's a crisis and providing full reports of risk assessment and what happened eventually made airline travel extremely dependable and extremely safe. Their mistakes still happen, but on the average, I think we all agree that compared to 30, 40 years ago, all of us prefer to fly now. So
Yes.
I think there is hope for us as an industry as we start to think more in the mindset of airlines, is that we as an industry move forward better if we can help each other learn from the crises that are happening, rather than focusing on hiding what actually was the real problem. Again, I'm not saying that all of the information should be made public. A lot of it is proprietary. I'm talking about the reason, the real root cause of why there was an outbreak. That is valuable information for protecting the consumer. And whatever version of it can be made available for all of us to learn from, I think would help us all move forward a little bit better.
Well said. And I have nothing to add to that. I think that's the perfect way to end our chat here today. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for this amazing chat. And proactivity, right? That's what we're all about, is preventing these things from happening. And we always need to keep that in mind. So hopefully we've given you some insights on how you can deal with that in your day-to-day, right? The whole goal is to keep from doing what we talked about. So do it now to keep these things from happening in the future. So thanks to my guests, Austin and Morrine, today. Amazing content, guys. And of course, thank you to everybody who joined us today. Top-notch comments, great input. I appreciate it, everyone. And of course, we will be back here next Friday for the next food safety chat, where I bring on amazing guests again. And it will be at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn and YouTube. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Have a great time. And we'll see you back there next week. So Austin, Morrine, thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Have a good weekend.